The Wise Guys TCG10. Coupon code. Use it. No, guys, it's Greg Farley from The Wise Guys, aka Pegasus, and it's time. It's that time again. We have another stop on the road to Nats, and this time we got to talk about Orcust. Orcust is really good. It's the second most represented deck. But why is it the second most represented deck? Is it the mere fact that the price tag is so low, outside of Dengersu, obviously, or is it just that the deck is really that easy to use, that common to use? It's that easy for someone to pick up and learn. I think it's a little bit of all of that, but I think the number one thing that makes it played is how smooth it is to go off of two cards and the math behind the deck. So let's get into the math behind the deck. You know I love math. We have to talk about orchestrated babble being just probably the deck's power card. It has a win loss percentage of, I think, 63%. It may change. It changes daily. And then we also have Orcust Crescendo at 61%. So basically, when you combine those two, you have two power spells and traps that do something very, very, very powerful, as well as the rest of the deck just being able to do anything off of what they inherently have. Moving on to more math, you have to talk about the staples, the extra deck staples mainly. There's no real set way that you have to play the deck, and I think that's the obvious strength. So now let's get back to the numbers. The numbers is what I care about. I think Galatea is somewhere around 60%. Dengersu, the Evening Star, whatever you want to call him in America, I always forget the translations, but how they're placed onto the field. When he's placed on the field on top of Galatea, which is going to be the predominant way that he's made an awful lot that way, and he's made to win at 65% of the time. So his win-loss ratio is 65%. So when you're preparing for this deck, whether you're playing it or you're playing against it, you have to understand that it's a collection of cards that mathematically add up to a win. It's not just one overwhelming card, like remember when I talked about Yugioh in the other video, and several other cards such as decks that can use Boral Sword and get straight to the point. This deck can as well. But I think we have to talk about the specifics of the deck. None of them are that ridiculous. 65% is the highest. And then you look at, let's say, Salamangreat Yugioh at 67%. So that's a whole 2% higher. Now, it doesn't sound like much, but when you really put it up next to a deck and side by side, you can see why Salamangreat comes out on top more often than not. I think the weirdest number that came across to me is the mere fact that the dangers really don't win as much as you think they would, and they're used at a very, very high count. Now, granted, when we're looking at the dangers, we're not only talking about Orcus, but if we're talking about the decks that you're preparing for Nats, danger is predominantly going to be in Thunder and Orcus, which is two of the decks, which may bring some of these numbers down. But if we look at Jackalope, Nessie, Tsuchinoko, and Bigfoot, they're all at like 54, 55, 56%. All of them are in that range. Now, does that mean that danger is just not good? No, it's a deck full of upstarts if your deck can play them. You can't look at it that way. You have to look at it as the fact that the number is not as high as the specific to the deck cards, if that makes any sense. So the mere fact that the deck can float, the deck can use graph-like cards like Harp Horror, Skeleton being somewhat like Seer, and being able to quick effect themselves off of what Galatea's effect can do and off of what Babel can do, and be able to rotate and wipe your opponent out quickly. The deck doesn't do all that well getting into the weaknesses portion, surviving long grind games. Now it can finish you off. It can set up and then finish you off rather quickly, but the longer the game goes, as you see with the winning percentage, the more the deck goes downhill. The deck is powerful. There's no question about it. The deck is powerful and it's the second most represented deck. But the conversion rate of a deck like this versus a deck like, let's say, Sky Striker, the conversion rate is two different things. If you ever notice when you look at top tier tournaments, I'm talking about YCS, I'm talking about Nationals, I'm talking about the big tournaments, the regionals, there can be a lot of Sky Striker decks in the field, a lot of Salamangreat decks in the field, but who's going to convert more? Those decks over Orcus. That doesn't mean Orcus can't beat them all, because sometimes, and this is where I think the biggest strength is, you can basically basically drop any kind of power card that was unseen by the rest of the world in and win the game. But that also can be the weakness, because if your tech doesn't come up, just like I said before, if your tech doesn't come up or it simply doesn't work the way you want it to on that day, I could drop 1,000 different techs that Orcust can use. You're basically gonna either win or lose off of that card specifically, and there's no way to measure that by math. So that would be the deck's weakness, its biggest strength and its biggest weakness. This is Greg Frawley from the Wise Guys, aka Pegasus. I hope this helped out a little bit. Obviously, when you guys listen to these videos, you know how these decks work. I'm just here to help present the math and try to help you learn what to look out for as we go into Nats. And then after that, when you have to play the deck regardless. YG baby.